All right, let's get into some spoilers for Heretic, starring Hugh Grant. So, I gave my non-spoiler review the other day. I ended up giving it a score of 3.5 out of 5. Like I said, I enjoyed the film. I had some questions and some kind of unanswered curiosities about some aspects of the film, some of the characters, some of the decisions and backstories that we just never got any kind of reveal for the most part. So let's get into the story. Let's get into the plot a little bit. The film begins with the two young women, the missionaries, Sister Barnes and Sister Paxton. They are sitting at what it looks like at a bus stop. They're on a bench, just kind of talking about whatever random stuff to kill time. They end up talking about condoms and Magnum condoms in particular. Are they actually for larger sizes, or are they the same size as other condoms and it's just kind of like an ego boost for people that use them? So one of them believes that Magnum condoms, or one of them thinks that Magnum condoms are just regular size condoms, just kind of branded for larger individuals. And the other thinks that they actually are larger for larger individuals. And they actually are different from regular condoms. So I kind of like the intro a little bit. They're just kind of shooting the shit, passing the time, and it's kind of a conversation you wouldn't necessarily expect two young Mormon women to be having while out on a mission. But that's what they're discussing. It's kind of interesting, and I like the opening. There's also a shot where you see like a cliff with what looks like maybe like a house at the top of it. I took that to mean that was possibly the house where the women end up knocking on Hugh Grant's door, and I think that's what the director was going for, because they did show that scene a couple other times in the film. It's so far away that you can't tell exactly what it is. It just looks like a mountainside, or like a large ridge where it looks like there's a house or some houses at the top of it. So it's a little hard to make out exactly what is going on, but I think that was meant to be Mr. Reed's house, where the girls eventually end up knocking at the door. So after some discussion and going around this town, don't get a name of the town, we're not sure exactly where it is. It's in a mountainous area, colder climate, it looks like. They kind of go around and give some elevator pitches to some people. They're not able to get them to stop and talk to them about the Mormon church or the LDS church. And they've kind of struck out for the day. They even got pranked by some teenagers who were doing like a TikTok video, and they kind of made the two women the center of a joke or a prank at their expense. So they were feeling a little bit bummed out. They hadn't had much success that day. And I think their last appointment of the day was to go to see this person named Mr. Reed, who had requested information about the church and requested to have some representatives come by his house to talk about LDS church and religion, as he was considering, joining. So this was, I believe, their last scheduled stop for the day. The two women make their way up to the house. They lock their bikes on the front gate, and as they do so, it begins to rain, and the rain gets heavier and heavier. They make their way up to the front door, and it's like a full-on thunderstorm by this point. It's raining very, very hard. There's some thunder and lightning and wind going on. They knock on the door, and it takes a few minutes, but Mr. Reed comes to the door, played by Hugh Grant, and he is expecting them. He invites them in. They're a bit hesitant because they are not supposed to be entering a a home where there is not a woman present. He assures them that his wife is inside. She is busy baking a pie, and they'll be able to meet her in a few moments. So they agree to go inside. He takes their coats, and he goes in, puts their coats in a different room, and they kind of make themselves, I wouldn't say at home, but they come into like the living room area, and they're, as I like this film because it's kind of realistic for the most part. For if you were to walk up to a random house and they invite you in, you're kind of just gonna like stand around and wait for them to offer you to have a seat, or come over here, let's talk in this room or whatever. So they kind of stand around for a few minutes, and Mr. Reed senses kind of their hesitance. So he says, have a seat, and he puts in front of them a platter of, I believe it was like 2 Coca-Colas, a couple drinks, and maybe a few snacks. So he puts that in front of them, and they're not really interested in having, anything to drink or eat. They kind of just want to talk to him about the LDS church, right? Because that's what they're there for. It's the end of the day. It was like 5 or 6 p.m. They just want to see if he's interested, and then go from there. So they begin to kind of explain to him, who they are a little bit, why they're there, why they are interested in talking with him about the LDS church. And he has a few questions for them, like, where are you from? How did you get involved in the church? Just kind of like basic kind of introductory questions, and they answer it. And then that goes on for a few moments, and then he brings up the topic of polygamy, which is when a man or a male figure has multiple wives. Usually the idea is that he marries multiple women, and he has children with them, and he kind of maintains each relationship to a degree, but they're considered to be like a larger family unit, right? There's been a few documentaries and docuseries shows that cover that. Some of them I suspect are probably pretty scripted. They're more like reality TV. Though they do get pretty intense sometimes. But the documentaries where they're covering, people who were formerly in the Mormon religion, formerly born into, or they married this guy, they fell in love. He said he was Mormon, and they didn't think much of it, and maybe they had a kid or two, and then all of a sudden this man, the husband, approaches the wife and says, I've decided to take a second wife. And that's, like, what the hell, what? So they just kind of spark it on the woman a little bit. The woman's supposed to just accept it as part of kind of the religious, kind of a religious necessity for the man to whatever. So, and then it kind of goes from there. He wants a second wife and a third wife, and then there's all kinds of kids, and there's what's the name? There's a phrase for it. Sister wives, I think. Yeah, sister wives, where they're kind of expected to take care of the house or houses, sort of keep, tend to the children, keep the house clean, take care of the affairs going on at the home while the man is, out working or doing whatever it is he does for a living. So anyway, back to the plot of the movie. Hugh Grant's character, Mr. Reed, asks about polygamy, and he prefaces it by saying, I want to ask an uncomfortable question, and they go ahead and agree, like, yeah, let's hear it. So he asks about polygamy, and the two sisters have somewhat of a kind of like a rehearsed response to it, where they're explaining how it used to be part of the LDS church, and now it's viewed as, it's kind of frowned upon. It's no longer a main doctrine of the church. And then Hugh Grant's character goes on to explain, his knowledge of it. Well, actually, I believe that, Joseph Smith just wanted to hook up with a bunch of chicks, and that's why he made up the story about polygamy is something that was asked of him by God, and it's going to be part of the church and everything. So he has somewhat of a comeback or a counterpoint for the points that they make about it, that it's kind of no longer a thing in the church, and he wants to talk about it and bring up things from the 18 or 1900s and talk about kind of the origins of polygamy. So the movie takes a little bit of a more uncomfortable turn at that point. As the conversation kind of ensues, they're talking for maybe 15-20 minutes at this point. They say, we'd like to continue talking to you, but we need your wife to be present because we're not allowed to be in a home with a man and no wife present, or no woman present. So he says, okay, let me go grab her. She's being shy. She doesn't want to come out. She's busy baking this pie. And then when he disappears into another part of the home, Sister Barnes, who is a little bit more the mature, no nonsense, a little bit more knowledgeable, it would seem, of the two sisters, she looks at the candle that's on the table, and she turns it and realizes the scent of the candle is blueberry pie. And that is what they have been smelling, not an actual pie baking. So she at that point realizes, this is weird. This is very awkward. I think he might be lying about having his wife here. This is a situation we need to get out of. Let's make up a story about, we got a phone call and we need to go back to the church because they've asked us to return. It's late in the day. The weather's getting rough. Let's go back. So Hugh Grant reappears. They tell him that they need to leave. They need to get back to the church. And this is after they had gone back to the front door and tried the door, and it didn't work. They couldn't get it unlocked. Hugh Grant returns. They tell him, hey, we got a phone call. We need to go back to the church. It's important. We're sorry to leave, but we need to go. And he calls their bluff. He says, well, I know you didn't get a phone call because there's metal in the walls and in the ceiling, and no cell signal can get in or out. So he kind of calls their bluff. He calls them out on their lie, and he says, if you want to leave, you can leave. I'm not going to keep you here. But you don't need to lie to me about it. So they say, whatever, we'd like to leave. We'd like to go now. So they ask him if he can, open the front door. And he says, I can't because the front door lock is on a timer, which makes no sense. I don't, obviously doesn't, that makes no sense to have a door lock that's on a timer. The girls kind of felt the same. They were like, that's really weird. That doesn't make a lot of sense. They didn't really buy it. So he says, well, I have another way out of the home. If you'd like to go through the back, you can go through the back of the home and leave that way. And they kind of say, well, it'd be more convenient to go out the front. We know where we are. Our bikes are out front. We want to go that way. And he again says, well, I can't open the front door. It won't open until tomorrow, whatever story. So they proceed further into the house. They're not real happy about it, but they cautiously proceed towards, more into the home. They end up in a room like an office or a study, where there's a lot of books, and there's a nice desk, and just some figures and paintings and sculptures and whatnot in there. And there's an interesting little you know, quirk to the home. So every, I don't know if it's 30 minutes, what it is, every so often the lights all turn off and then they have to be turned back on using this timer deal. So every so often the lights will turn off, the room will go dark, and then Mr. Reed has to go and turn them back on, which is just kind of it's kind of a distracting and a little bit ominous of an element to the, you know, the first half or so of the film. And in this next room, the library room, there is a leak coming through the roof, and the water dripping from the leak drips into this, like, it looks like a piece of bamboo, and then when the bamboo gets full, it flips and dumps the water into a bucket. So there's just these couple things that are sort of distracting from the conversation, from the main themes of the film a little bit. I found them to be somewhat effective. So yeah, and before they actually headed into the library, Sister Paxton notices there a butterfly flying around the living room, and it ends up flying up into one of the light fixtures and just kind of bouncing off the light. So that is kind of a foreshadowing, and gives you a little bit of an idea of, you know, the butterfly is stuck, right? It's trapped, it can't get out. And it's a literal and a figurative metaphor for what would happen later in the film. And we'll get into that in a little bit. So in this next room, this library, the conversation takes a little bit of a strange turn. Mr. Reed continues to challenge them on their understanding of religion. He goes through all the religions, you know, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Hinduism. He goes through kind of how they all began, how they're all very similar, and the reason why he believes they are each faulty to, you know, to a degree, because they're just another iteration of a previous religion or religious idea. So the religion theme continues. He compares it to board games and music that had been kind of copied or repeated. That, you know, a song from the 60s, he puts on a record player by the Hollies, and you know, I think it's called All I Need Is the Air That I Breathe. He plays the song, and he tells them, you know, I bet you haven't heard, or no, he says, I bet you recognize the song. I bet you've heard the song before. And they say, no, I don't, you know, they're like 20, 21-year-old women. They don't know the song. And he goes on to explain that Radiohead basically ripped off the song and turned it into one of their biggest hits, which was called Creep. And they obviously did know the song Creep, because he sings it a little bit, and you know, they did recognize it. And he explains how Creep was a ripoff of the Hollies song, and then later on, another artist, Lana Del Rey, rips off Creep, and she gets sued for that, and Radiohead got sued by the Hollies, and yada yada. So he's paralleling, you know, religious ideas and doctrines with things like board games and music and other aspects of society. So the comparisons are kind of cool. They're educational. This is stuff that the women obviously didn't know, and this is a man, you know, in his 60s that has lived a long life, a good life. I don't know what a good life, but a long life, and he's learned a lot of this stuff, and now it's his chance to kind of lecture these two young women on religion and why it may be kind of a more questionable activity or, you know, behavior for them to participate in it than they maybe thought. So the conversation in the library continues to just turn a little bit more and more strange. the women obviously at this point realize they're trapped. So Sister Barnes says, well, we just want to leave. There's 2 doors in the library that appear to head towards the back of the home. And he says, you know, you're free to leave, go ahead. So Sister Barnes opens one of the doors and doesn't quite like what she sees. So she goes to the other door, opens it. And again, she's, you know, disappointed and upset. And turns out that the 2 doors, as we'll find out later, end up going to the same place. So Hugh Grant's character, Mr. Reed, writes on one door, he writes the word belief, and then the other door he writes disbelief. And this is metaphorical for a lot of things, but he then asks them, you know, a series of questions about which door they might be choosing, and Sister Paxton wants to choose the door that has the phrase disbelief on it, because she feels that that's kind of how to beat him, is just to admit that he's right and just go on about their day and get out of there. So that's her plan. And Sister Barnes says, no, I don't think that's the right thing to do. I think we don't allow this man to convince us that we are wrong, and we are going to continue to believe, and we need to go through the belief door. So they ultimately choose the belief door, and as we find out, that door heads down into a basement, where it's, you know, very dark and dingy and everything. And now they realize they're really screwed. They were told that this is the way out of the home. Obviously, that was not correct. They are getting further and further trapped inside this house. And now they are really starting to panic and need to plan a way out. So they come up with an idea where Mr. Reed, when he comes down, one of them will say a magic word and the other will go and stab him in the neck. And hopefully by killing him, they can then figure out how to get out of this house, because they realize if he decides to kill them or attack them, they're not physically strong enough to, you know, overpower him. So they need to surprise him, subdue him, and then find their way out, however that happens. Because again, they can't make any calls or texts from the home because of the metal in the walls and ceilings, so they can't get any signal out to anybody to ask for help. So they have a plan. They're in the basement. Suddenly this door opens and this figure kind of walks slowly down the steps. It is what appears to be this old woman who's skin and bones. She's covered in dirt or ash or something. Does not look good. That old woman sits down at a table. Mr. Reed explains that the pie that the woman has is poisonous and that she will die and then she will come back to life, which is kind of strange. So that, you know, thereby performing a miracle, and then they'll witness this miracle. So the woman sits down at the table. She eats this pie very, very grossly. She eats it with her fingers and just kind of like smears it everywhere. It's gross. And then a couple minutes later, she passes out and stops breathing. And the girls go and check her pulse and her breath. She's dead. It would appear she's dead, right? So she's sitting at this table dead, with, you know, slumped over dead. And at this time, the girls are like, okay, you know, what now? What happens now? So they go back up the steps and try to figure out how to get out. And as they are heading up the steps, the doorbell rings, and it is one of the male missionaries or bishops from the church there to ask if Mr. Reed has seen these 2 girls, because his address was on their appointment book for for the day. So Mr. Reed's distracted, goes to the door to answer the door. The girls go up the stairs. They try to scream and get, his attention. They are not able to be heard from where they're at. So they see some matches on the floor on a carpet. So they pull the carpet towards them. Eventually they are able to get some matches out of the matchbox, and then they go back down in the basement and try to start a fire, which I'm not sure how that would have gone, but they were, I guess, hoping maybe the fire department or police would show up if they saw a fire, or it would at least force Mr. Reed to make a decision. Is he going to let them die down there in a fire, or what's going to happen? I don't know. But I don't know that was necessarily the best plan. So they're lighting these matches, and they keep going out, and they're not able to get anything on fire. And Sister Paxton looks at the woman at the table, and she says, well, it looks like she's moved. Her head is in a different position. And Sister Barnes says, I don't think so. She looks like she's the same as she was. And then lo and behold, a couple minutes later, the old woman suddenly appears behind them. It's kind of like a little bit of a jump scare. She says something. She talks about supposedly being dead, and that there's clouds and it's gray, and the end of her speech is that it's not real, or this is not real, or something like that. And then Mr. Reed comes down and takes the woman back to wherever she came from, and tells the girls that they just witnessed a miracle. This old lady died and then came back to life. And at this point, they aren't really quite sure what to believe. They definitely have suspicion whether that actually happened or not. So that gets explored a little bit later. So anyway, they're talking more in the basement, and Mr. Reed is just kind of a creepy guy, obviously, right? So he gets close to them. They say the magic word. Sister Paxton goes to stab him, but before she can do that, Mr. Reed stabs Sister Barnes, cuts her throat. So she collapses, she's bleeding out, she's dying on the floor there in the basement. So she appears to be a goner, and Mr. Reed says, not to worry, she will come back to life. I will make sure that after she dies, she comes back. And then she, a few minutes goes by, she's clearly dead. She does not come back to life. So he says, well, she must be like a plant or an NPC. She's just a robot. She's not real. That's why she didn't come back. And it's at this point that Sister Paxton finally starts to challenge him. Previous to this, it was mostly Sister Barnes who was challenging Mr. Reed's ideas and theories on things. But Sister Paxton finally speaks up and starts to challenge him, and she says, I don't believe that we witnessed a miracle. I think that you somehow switched out the bodies of the old woman with somebody else, and that she didn't actually come back to life. And the little thing that you cut out of Sister Barnes's arm was not a chip, like a robot chip. That was just birth control. So she's finally catching on. She's being a lot more observant than we previously wanted to give her credit for. She finally stands up to him and starts kind of putting the pieces together about where things are and where things are going. So Mr. Reed says, well, if that's true, then there must be another way out of this basement, right? So eventually Sister Paxton finds that there is a little bit of a hatch door under the table where the woman was seated. So she opens it, and then Mr. Reed kind of says, you'll find your way out if you go down there. And, you know, I guess Sister Paxton figured she was already trapped in a basement. She was probably going to die. She just saw her friends, killed. She probably figured, well, if I'm going to die, I want to figure out what this guy's doing and what the hell is going on down in this dungeon area. So she goes down there, and this is the part where I don't really understand the Mr. Reed character. So this whole movie, he's lecturing them, talking to them. He's always like very vocal and always has like a comeback or says something about whatever's going on. And then this is that weird moment where she starts going down the ladder to the dungeon, and he just kind of like peers down at her and just slams the door. I don't really understand that action by the character. It doesn't make sense. It's almost like he has like multiple personality, where his main personality is like this very talkative, very proper, very well, seemingly well-meaning guy. And then there's this other side of him where he's just like this very menacing, like dark, I don't give a fuck, like you're gonna die kind of dude, where he like switches all of a sudden and he just looks down at her and then slams the hatch door. So I thought that was strange. I don't know if anybody else really picked up on that, but I thought that was really weird. That doesn't seem to be something that the character that we knew would just do. It doesn't seem to be an action that he would do. But anyway, so she gets down to the bottom of the ladder, and it's like this dungeon area, very cold, very, like wet and everything. And she's wandering around, opening up doors, making her way through these like tunnels and whatnot. And she gets to this door that is locked using the bike lock that they originally locked their bikes up to his gate with when they arrived at his house. And it's kind of like an interesting little twist. So Mr. Reed had moved the key to the bike lock from Sister Barnes's coat over to Sister Paxton's coat. So I guess he had this thing kind of all planned out from the start. I guess that's what you're led to believe. So Sister Paxton has the key to the bike lock. She unlocks the bike lock, opens up the room, and there are a bunch of cages with, it looks like old, near death, skinny, skin and bones, like old women. Let me jump back a minute. So when she gets down in the dungeon, because her theory was that he replaced this body and they didn't witness the miracle, right? That's her theory, was that the body got replaced after the person died and they didn't witness the miracle of the old woman sitting at the table with the pie. So she sees the body of the old woman, and that confirms to her that he's lying. They did not witness a miracle. Nobody came back from the dead. And then she continues through the tunnels to the door with the bike lock, goes in it. There's cages full of old women in there. Who knows how they got there? But Mr. Reed then, this is what's just very strange. After, like I said a few minutes ago, he looks down at her and slams the door of the cellar door. But then she gets to the end where the women are all at, and then he just like appears there. So I don't know. It feels like a multiple personality issue, because if it was the same guy from the start of the film to this point, he was trying to prove to her something and she was truly trapped. Why wouldn't he just escort her through the cellar and these tunnels, and to freak her out more, show her all this stuff, and I did this and this is from there, and it just doesn't make sense to me. But anyway, he reappears in this room with all these women that are in these little cages, and he like squirts water into their mouth, and apparently he takes care of them just enough to keep them alive, but they have obviously a terrible life. They're living in a tiny little cage, like a chicken or a rabbit or something. And Sister Paxton says, I think I figured it out. You said you wanted to show me what the true meaning of religion, or what the one true religion is. And she says, I think one true religion is control. And he goes, oh, very good, very good. Well done, you figured it out. And then from this point, I don't think they know how to end the film, because nothing that happens after this, other than the very ending, which I actually kind of liked, but everything that happens from this point forward is just very strange. And I guess the strangeness started when she went down the cellar, and then he just looks at her and just slams the door, which is not in line with what that character had been doing for the last 75, 80 minutes. I don't know where that came from. So anyway, she figures it all out, and she figures out that control is the true religion. And let's see. She runs away from him, and they end up both back in the basement area where the old woman with the pie was, and where the dead body of Sister Barnes is. And again, it's like a cat and mouse game, but Sister Paxton is stuck. She can't go anywhere. So he keeps chasing her around, and I'm just like, she can't go anywhere. She's stuck. She only goes where you want her to go. So it's not really like a chase. I don't know. So they end up back in the basement area. They talk a little bit. He ends up saying the magic word that the two girls had previously agreed would be when she would stab him with the letter opener. So he says the magic word, and she goes and stabs him. And he stumbles down to the ground, and he's struggling and bleeding out and everything, and he ends up catching back up to her, and then he stabs her in the stomach. And then there's an interesting little scene where they're both, I think, realize that they're dying, they're bleeding to death, and Sister Paxton mentions the study where essentially the power of prayer is kind of put to the test, and it ends up not having any impact on the outcome of the experiment. Therefore, praying is pointless. So she is praying because she still believes in God and her religion. And Mr. Reed asked her I believe it was mockingly, pray for me, pray for me, let's say some prayers. So they have this weird moment where they're hugging, and he's nestled up against her, almost like he wants comforting. And it's just very weird. And all of a sudden he rears up with the knife again, and at that point he gets hit in the head by something. And it ends up that Sister Barnes had, I don't know if some people believe she came back from the dead and this was the miracle, or maybe she was just unconscious and briefly woke up, but she whacks him over the head, and then she falls and collapses and goes back to being dead, I guess. So this allows Sister Paxton the opportunity to run back up the stairs, back to the library, where she finds this diagram. There's a little mini diagram of the house. She locates on there how to get out of the home. So she crawls through this window. She lands in this snowy kind of field where there's flowers and trees and clouds, and it's snowing. Which is another weird thing. The start of the film, It was a thunderstorm. People were going around in, I wouldn't call it like cold weather clothes. They were going around in like jeans and jackets, right? So it's thunderstorming at the start of the film. And then by the time they initially go into the library and start talking about all this junk, it's snowing outside. So it's like a blizzard, I guess. So she lands in this snowy field with these flowers, and this butterfly lands on her hand. And earlier in the film, Mr. Reed explains that there's this philosophical idea of a butterfly dream where we aren't sure if we are supposed to believe that a man is dreaming of a butterfly or a butterfly is dreaming of a man. It's a weird metaphor, but at that point Sister Paxton says, well, when I come back, or after I'm dead, I'm going to come back as a butterfly and land on the hand of my loved ones to let them know that I'm there. So this is a nice callback to that moment. She's in the snowy field. She's still bleeding to death. She's dying. And then this butterfly lands on her hand briefly. And she kind of looks at it, and I'm assuming it gave her a moment of comfort. And then she looks again, and the butterfly's gone. Now, obviously, this is very cold weather. There's a blizzard going on. There's not likely to be any butterflies around. Butterflies are warm weather critters. They're not going to be flying around in a blizzard. So my interpretation of this is that Sister Paxton was at the moment of death, and she came back as kind of the butterfly dream states. She came back as a butterfly, landed on her own hand, right? So she's sort of hallucinating or dreaming of this butterfly on her hand. Meanwhile, she came back as a butterfly, and the butterfly is hallucinating and dreaming of her, of this human that she used to be. So that's how I interpreted the ending, right? And I thought it was a cool ending. Overall, obviously sad that everybody ends up dying, and there really wasn't a point to the story other than punishing people that believe in a religion. Mr. Reed's, again, we don't find out any of his motivation. There's no backstory to him. There's no reveal as to why he does this or why he is holding these women captive in his basement. He's got a bunch of women in cages, and I don't know. He claims to want to be seeking out the one true religion and trying to perform miracles, but then he undermines his own attempt at miracles by just switching bodies out and trying to trick other people into believing that he did perform a miracle. So it's like he's trying to play God, but he's cheating at it. And that's kind of a recurring theme through the film, right? He wants the women to feel like they are in control of what they are doing and where they're going. But from every moment after they step inside his home, he is fully in control of what they're thinking, where they're going, what they're doing. And that dichotomy, I understand the point of the film is that religion is control. But what is that really saying that hasn't been said a million times before? What is the film getting at that, I don't know how many people are non-religious in the world, let's just say 25%. What is the film really wanting to get at, and why would a 60-something-year-old guy be killing women and doing these weird things? What is his motivation? What is his end game? It's like he ended up dead. He continuously put himself purposely in situations where these women had access to potential weapons that they could use to kill him. But yet his whole game is like, I'm in control. So he just continued to undermine his own doctrine, like his own modus operandi. Like he kept saying, I'm in control, you know, he kept insinuating, I'm in control, you're not in control, blah, blah, blah. But then he kept putting himself in harm's way, like purposely. And he ends up dead. And for what? Like what? And now there's just these old women in his dungeon dying in cages of starvation and hypothermia. Like, I don't know. I'm not sure unless the film is a lot more read between the lines than it seems to be. And I know there is some aspect of that, you know. Maybe Sister Paxton and Sister Barnes, maybe they both died in the basement and everything that happens from there is just kind of a dream or hallucination or whatever. Or maybe this is all in Mr. Reed's imagination. Maybe the two women come to the door, and when they realize that there isn't a woman immediately present, they leave and go back off. They don't stay. They say, well, we'll come back tomorrow when your wife's here. That would explain why the bikes are gone, right? Now this is really kind of really like maybe reading into it way too much. But maybe everything that happens from the time that the women appear at his doorstep is all in his mind, right? Maybe it's his game that he planned to play with these women, and he doesn't end up doing so. And the reason why these women are missing and somebody still comes to look for them is because his address was on their appointment book, and they said they were about 4 miles from the church. It was getting late. It was bad weather. It was getting dark. Possibly they maybe continued on to a different home, or they stayed somewhere for the night just to kind of ride out the weather. And that might be why they didn't get back to the church or whatever. So I know that doesn't really explain everything. You know, like why wouldn't they have called and told the church that they weren't going to come back? Maybe they did. Maybe they called after they closed up the church and after the guy went out to kind of figure out where they were. So, yeah, I mean, this is a film you can interpret a lot of different ways. Me being a very imaginative person, I'm trying to kick around possibilities, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be the intent of the director or the writer, what my feelings are, because perception is a reality. My perception of the film is what it is. I had a couple alternative ideas that I shared kind of at the end here. So yeah, all in all, 3.5 out of 5. Pretty good film. Makes you question some things for sure. Suspenseful. Acting is really good. Some of the character decisions are a little bit odd, to say the least. But overall, a good film. I think worth watching. So yeah, that's going to wrap it up. We will hopefully get some more horror reviews coming soon. And I hope everybody has a great weekend. See ya.